They told you the first Hebrews were European-looking desert wanderers, pale-skinned nomads chosen to inherit a land of milk and honey. They lied. The biblical Abraham, the man Jews, Christians, and Muslims all call father, was no pale man from a cold northern land. He was a black man. His descendants, the original Israelites, were people of color living in the hot cradle of civilization, indistinguishable from their African neighbors. Yet look at Israel today. White faces dominate its politics, military, and culture. They look more like Berlin than Bethlehem, more Warsaw than Canaan. So what happened? How did people rooted in Africa and the Middle East transform into a European-looking power elite? Where did these white Israelis really come from? And why does no one talk about the black roots of ancient Israel? In this video, let's find out. To fully understand why modern Israel looks so different from the ancient Israel of the Bible, we must go back to its very roots, back to Abraham, the man often called the father of faith for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. The biblical Abraham was not European. Geographically and culturally, he was a man of the Afro-Asiatic world. He lived in Mesopotamia and later migrated to Canaan, an ancient land bridging Africa and Asia, sharing borders and culture with Egypt, Nubia, modern Sudan, and Ethiopia. Historical interpretations, including the original Black Jews by Rudolph R. Windsor, argue that Abraham's lineage, descending from Shem, emerged from a region and climate where dark skin was the norm, not the exception. Geography alone is telling. Ancient Mesopotamia and Canaan were hot, arid environments, where light-skinned populations were rare before large-scale northern migrations. Abraham and his descendants would have had appearances more aligned with the darker-skinned populations of East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, rather than the pale features later associated with Europeans. This connection deepened through intermarriages and alliances, the most famous being the union of King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba, often linked to modern Ethiopia and Yemen. Their son, Menelik I, is celebrated as the ancestor of Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty and the Beta Israel community, Ethiopian Jews known for their strong adherence to ancient Jewish practices that predate modern rabbinic Judaism. This was not an isolated case. Israelite history is filled with African connections. Egypt, for example, was not just a neighboring land, but a place of refuge for biblical figures like Abraham himself, Jacob, Joseph, and even Jesus centuries later. Genetic studies of ancient Canaanite remains also show a strong overlap with populations from North Africa and the Horn of Africa, indicating a shared genetic pool. The Israelites of the Old Testament were therefore unmistakably people of color, living in a multicultural, Afro-Semitic world where trade, migration, and intermarriage were common. Their culture, diet, dress, and physical features reflected their environment, a people whose lives were intertwined with Africa. Fast forward centuries, and something dramatic happened, something that would redefine what being Jewish looked like. This shift didn't originate in the Middle East, but thousands of miles away in Eastern Europe, in a kingdom few today even know existed, the Khazar Empire. The Khazars were a powerful Turkic people who ruled a vast territory between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, controlling lucrative trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. In the 8th century CE, their king, Bulan, officially converted to Judaism, and much of the Khazar ruling elite followed. This conversion was unusual. The Khazars had no direct blood connection to Abraham or the ancient Israelites, but adopted Judaism for political and cultural reasons, partly to remain independent of both Christian Byzantium and the Muslim Caliphate. Over time, these Khazar Jews intermarried with neighboring European populations, adopting local customs, languages, and even physical traits. The descendants of these communities eventually became what we now call Ashkenazi Jews, whose cultural heartland stretched across Germany, Poland, Lithuania, and Russia. They spoke Yiddish, a fusion of Hebrew and German, lived in climates that shaped lighter complexions, and developed a cultural identity very different from the Semitic African roots of ancient Israel. By the Middle Ages, Ashkenazi Jews had grown to be the majority of the global Jewish population. They were geographically and genetically removed from the original Israelites, yet religiously tied to them through the shared belief system they had adopted centuries earlier. Then, the Second World War triggered one of the largest migrations in modern history, as millions of European Jews, many of Ashkenazi origin, sought refuge. Palestine, under British mandate at the time, became the focal point for this migration, and with the creation of Israel in 1948, these European Jews became the political, cultural, and demographic majority. This demographic reality reshaped Israel's image, a land geographically in the Middle East, but culturally dominated by Europeans. Institutions, government, and economic power were centered on those of Ashkenazi background, while the darker-skinned Jews, such as Ethiopian Beta Israel, Yemenite Jews, and African Hebrew Israelites, often faced discrimination and marginalization. In short, today's white Israelis are largely the descendants of European converts to Judaism, rather than the biological lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This doesn't erase their Jewish faith, but does highlight how drastically migration, conversion, and power dynamics altered the ethnic face of Israel. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. When Israel was established in 1948, it brought together Jewish communities from all over the world. Among them were Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, Sephardic Jews from Spain and Portugal, and Mizrahi Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. Each group carried its own unique culture, language, and historical memory. Yet, almost immediately, Israel's cultural and political leadership, dominated by Ashkenazi Europeans, began reshaping what it meant to be Israeli. The vision of the new state was modeled heavily on European norms and aesthetics, and those who arrived from Arab and African countries were often pressured to shed their traditional ways. Speaking Arabic, Persian, or Ladino was discouraged, as Hebrew became the national language. Even then, it was not the Hebrew as spoken by Yemenite or Moroccan Jews, but the standardized form molded by European academics and intellectuals. Family names that sounded too Arab were changed, and cultural practices considered too Oriental were suppressed, replaced with European-style education and social expectations. This cultural assimilation extended beyond language and dress. It even touched on physical appearance. There were documented instances of government-supported cosmetic procedures like nose surgeries offered to Mizrahi and Sephardic immigrants to make them look more European. Darker skin tones were subtly stigmatized, while lighter complexions and European facial features were quietly presented as ideal. What emerged was a hierarchy of belonging, where those who could assimilate into Ashkenazi cultural norms found easier paths to success, while those holding on to their Middle Eastern or African roots were seen as backward or less modern. The case was clear. To be fully accepted as Israeli, one had to become more like the Europeans who built the state. For Black Jews, particularly the Ethiopian Beta Israel and the African Hebrew Israelites, this hierarchy was far more punishing. The Ethiopian Jews trace their ancestry to ancient times, claiming lineage that reaches back to the union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Despite this profound historical connection, their arrival in Israel was met not with celebration, but with suspicion and discrimination. One of the most tragic and publicized cases of racial violence was the killing of Solomon Tekka, a teenage Ethiopian Israeli, by an off-duty policeman in 2019. His death sparked mass protests similar to racial justice movements in the United States, highlighting how deep the divisions ran in Israeli society. Similarly, in 2015, Damas Pakada, an Ethiopian-born soldier serving in the Israeli Defense Forces, was brutally assaulted by police even while wearing his military uniform. these incidents exposed an uncomfortable truth. In Israel, skin color still dictated one's experience, even in institutions built on the ideal of national unity. Today, at the top of Israel's political, military, and cultural pyramid sit the descendants of Ashkenazi Jews, who arrived from Europe and built the country's foundational institutions. Most Israeli prime ministers and presidents have come from this background, as have most senior military and intelligence officials. The national narrative promoted in schools, media, and government largely reflects European Jewish history and culture, often downplaying or oversimplifying the contributions of Jews from Africa and the Middle East. This dominance is not an accident of history, but the result of centuries of social conditioning and an implicit hierarchy that associates European features, culture, and behavior with progress and modernity, while casting darker-skinned and non-European Jews as culturally inferior or in need of civilizing. This raises deeper questions about identity and power. The erasure of the Israelites' original African identity is not simply a historical oversight. It is a deliberate rewriting of who the Jewish people are meant to be in the public imagination. It changes how global audiences perceive Jewish identity, transforming it into something far more European than it historically was. It influences how Israel itself treats its own people, with Black Jews and even Palestinians often finding themselves marginalized or excluded from full participation in the life of the nation. And it shapes geopolitics, casting Israel less as a native Middle Eastern society and more as a Western enclave in a region it has struggled to integrate with. Recognizing that the ancient Israelites were people of color with strong African and Semitic roots changes everything. It challenges the racial hierarchy that privileges whiteness not only in Israel, but across the world. It forces uncomfortable questions. Who controls history? Who decides what a specific group of people are supposed to look like? And what happens when entire populations are pressured to change their names, their culture, even their physical features, just to be accepted? In the end, the story of the white Israelis is not simply about migration or conversion. It is a story about how power reshapes identity, how whiteness has been used as a tool for dominance, and how a people who once looked far more like today's Ethiopians were transformed in the public mind into something else entirely. What do you think? If Abraham was a Black man, why do most modern Israelis look like Europeans? Are today's white Israelis really descendants of Abraham or converts from Europe? In the comments section below, share your thoughts on, what if the world learned the Israelites were originally Black? What would it change? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.